Welcome back. Transfer Spotlight. Jason Staples. I'm Tommy Ashley. Inside Carolina and Johnny T-shirt. Today is Antavious Lane, safety out of Georgia State. He gets to North Carolina. Will have a couple years remaining on his. Well, I guess a year remaining plus a COVID year. So that marks two. We talked about this earlier in the week. COVID years we'll be discussing COVID years when we're all old and gray. I guess one of us is already there. But Lane comes to Carolina, safety out of Georgia State. Jason, I'll start with this. Mac Brown, in his transfer press conference a couple weeks ago, said, these days with the transfer portal, when you play against a guy from an FCS school or a G5 school or whatever, you walk over and you shake the best player's hand immediately because you never know when he might be looking for a landing spot. Carolina played Georgia State, struggled with Georgia State early in the season before pulling away. Oh, actually, before winning by 7, one of the close games. Lane, a big part of that. What's North Carolina getting in the 5'9", 180-pound ish safety?
Yeah, he's a guy he's an interesting person to scout because when you watch him on tape, you wouldn't actually think he was 5'9", 180. So he plays big. I think he's got a little longer wingspan than 5'9" would suggest. So I think he's got a little more length. Looks to me like he's probably closer to like a 6 foot 6'1" wingspan. I'd love to see the measurement on that. But he plays a little longer, a little bigger than what you'd expect there. And that was definitely evident against North Carolina. And yeah, he chose a good week to put up his best game of the year against North Carolina last year. I mean, I'm looking through the Pro Football Focus grades, and I see that on the year, his highest grade by far was the 84.7 overall grade that he had against North Carolina, and a 93.9 run defense grade against North Carolina. He came up and made a bunch of tackles against Carolina's backs that would have potentially been bigger plays. It potentially been long plays. There were a few runs that, guys just didn't win at the second level. And who did they not win against? It was this guy. And so that's something that I'm confident that the North Carolina staff, once his name hit, they went back and they looked at their own film and they said, well, our guys had trouble with him. And so, that's kind of how this comes out. Now, he was not as consistent as I'd like to see, especially at the safety position. And you go back over the last couple of years, and there have been some times where you'd like to see him in a little better place, but he's a guy that I think one of the things that's a common factor that you can look at with all the guys that they brought in, they all seem to be guys who love to play football. And he's another one of those guys that you watch him on the field and you're like, yeah, that guy likes to play. He likes to come up and he likes to hit. And some of the mistakes that he makes are the kind of aggressive player mistakes. And I think that if I had to guess, I think that's something that Gene Chizik and Mac Brown are actually looking for in terms of the kinds of players that they're bringing in right now. They're looking for guys who, if they're going to make a mistake, they want it to be the aggressive mistake. Guys who that's just kind of the way they're wired. They don't want guys who are not going to play physical. And he's a guy that even at 180 pounds at the safety position came up and played physical. I do wonder, again, how much they're going to sort of mix and match guys. I mean, are they going to look at him at that sort of nickel spot to give Boykins some competition? Are they going to have him at a true safety spot? I'm curious to see sort of where he falls. And, I really wish he were a spring addition. I mean, he's going to graduate in May and then come over in the summer, which diminishes how much you can kind of expect for him in year one right away. Although, again, it's different from a high school guy where early enrolling really, really matters. It still does impact how quickly you can kind of get up to speed. So, I'm a little bit more measured in terms of what to expect from him this year. But I think in terms of overall evaluation, I see him as another guy that more or less can raise the floor in the secondary by being another guy that if you're going to beat him out, you're going to have to be a good player. You're going to actually have to be consistent. You're going to have to be a solid tackler and somebody that plays with aggression, or he's going to take your spot.
Yeah, I think that's a big deal, especially in college football, especially for this North Carolina team. 6 tackles, 6 solo tackles against North Carolina, 2 forced fumbles. He played a week before that against South Carolina and had 8 total tackles against them. Jason, he's another guy that has intercepted some passes, and North Carolina has had struggles with that. 11 total interceptions at Georgia State in 4 years. With the ability to catch it and run. He's had a 55-yard long return and a 42-yard long return early. As far as let's talk strictly safety right now before we talk about moving him up. Is what are his best traits? What are his worst traits as a safety that you've seen on film?
I think his best trait is probably, at least in 2022, his best trait was his ability to come up and tackle with consistency. He's a guy that was, even at 180 pounds, he regularly came up and took good angles and consistently basically just took guys' legs out. And so I think that's probably his best trait. I think his worst trait is I think he can get overwhelmed a little bit in coverage at times by the right body type wide receiver. So you look at the overall coverage grade on the year. I mean, he gave up a 92.4 NFL passer rating when targeted this year, which is not great. Now, last year that was 58.9. That's pretty decent. You'll live with that. So you want him to kind of return to a little bit more of what he did the year prior in terms of coverage, but I think what you're getting with him in terms of strength is more of a guy that's going to be a sort of an eraser or someone who can help in run support, which is sort of funny to say for a 5'9", 180-pound guy, but that's the thing that sticks out first. It's a guy that comes up and reliably makes tackles as the final line of defense.
Yeah, I mean, 87 tackles on the season, 2022, 2.5 for loss, the 2 interceptions, the 2 forced fumbles on the season happened against North Carolina. You're right. He picked a great day to have one of his better days on the season. As far as the room now, just sort of compare and contrast. You got Derek Allen coming from Georgia Tech. That's a P5 to P5. We discussed that. And you've got Lane coming over from Georgia State now. How has the room sort of settled? You hope to have Jacarius Conley back in full. Cam Kelly's moved on. You've got Geo Biggers back there. I'm missing somebody,
Don
but
Chapman. You're missing
Don
Don
Chapman
Chapman and Will Hardy.
and Will Hardy. So now you've got basically a complete safety room, if you want to put it that way, with guys that can do different things. How do you see North Carolina's room compared to last year, potentially in 2023?
Well, I think just having just having the most important guy or your most talented guy at safety back for next year upgrades the room already. If Jaquarius is able to come back anywhere close to the athleticism and the player that he was before the injury, then you're already better than you were. Now, he still has to grow as a safety. Again, it'll be interesting to see what role he plays on this defense because we really haven't seen him in this defense. But I think if he comes back and is the player that he was before, then he upgrades your defense by his presence and especially by the physicality and the edge that he brings. So then after that, you're basically, and I kind of think of the star, Boykins as, part of that room as well. I think at that point, it's a matter of figuring out who your 3 or 4 most reliable guys are who can play the proper roles to give you your best 5 in the secondary. So, you hope that JQ is one of them. And that would suggest that he's getting back to being the player that he could have been before. And then it's a matter of can Derek Allen beat out, say, Geo Biggers or, Don Chapman. What role can Don Chapman have back there? Does somebody challenge Boykins in that role? And you add these two, you add Lane and you add Derek Allen to the mix, and I think you feel like I don't think you're worse off with those guys than you were with, say, Cam Kelly. And I think overall you've got a little bit better depth. So you feel like the room itself is in better shape. But again, that's sort of contingent on Jaquarius Conley being fully healthy. If not, then I think your floor is basically where the room was last year. That you basically traded out different players, and you wind up with a comparable talent level across the board. Maybe JQ is not fully healthy, or maybe the fit in terms of what they're asking him to do doesn't work as well. That's kind of where your floor would wind up. But I think there's more upside in the room with the bodies that they brought in, and they're basically betting on upside more than they're worried about other things on that.
So just to sort of wrap the transfer spotlight, Antavious Lane joins, and like you mentioned, he'll be there first semester, summer, I guess in June, with a couple years remaining, unless he blows up and goes pro after the first one. But North Carolina added defensive players. They lost a significant chunk of the defensive backfield room. We've talked about it. They've added these defensive players. And I didn't give you a heads up on this question before we started recording this one. But overall, given what they lost in the portal on the defensive side, what they've gained in the portal on the defensive side with Allen, Chapman, Huzzy, Gaynor, and Lane, balance it for me. Give me your expertise here. Lost a lot, gained a lot. Where's the needle on improvement or not?
Well, they better be improved.
Well, yeah. If they're not improved, just forget everything we've talked about.
So I've already said that given the situation at the corner position last year, you came into the season expecting those corners to play better than they did.
Yep.
But knowing what we know from last year in terms of how the year started with a concussion for Grimes, and Duck not being healthy until close to midseason, and then not being there for not entirely being there for the last bit either. I think the corner position should be upgraded, and I think fairly significantly over last year. I think the safety position with Jaquarius Conley returning should be also a little better. And then with Gaynor coming in, I think you're significantly improved over where you were at the end of the year just because of all of those injuries. So, I think overall you should expect personnel-wise to be a little stronger than you were last year. But I've also been very much on the record in saying that personnel was not the primary problem last year, at least not in terms of talent level. So they had plenty of talent and should have played better on the whole than they did last year on defense. So really the challenge is they needed to replace what they had with at least comparable talent, and then find a way to get guys that are going to upgrade the overall culture on that side of the ball to play at the level of intensity and the level of urgency and the level of consistency that they need to be good on that side of the ball. And I think in that respect, the guys that they brought in probably fit that bill pretty well. So, we'll see how well some of that cultural, some of that DNA transfers into the program. I mean, I think that's what they're hoping for here, but that's got to be a critical part of this. And, can you get some of the leadership from these transfers who are coming from places where the physicality was front and center? Can they transition and bring that into a North Carolina program where that was, on short supply last year? I think overall, look, if the defense is worse than last year, I mean, I don't even know what to say.
Yeah, really.
But I mean, things had better be better than they were last year. And I think they've got the pieces to where they should be better than they were last year. And they should be a lot better than they were last year. But I'm very much wait and see until I get more indication that that side of the ball is getting healthier in the areas that it really needs to.
Yep, we are not playing the Charlie Brown again. It's a wait and see thing for this bunch. That's Jason Staples. I'm Tommy Ashley. It's been the Inside Carolina Transfer Spotlight. Uh, Kickers Ryan Coe and Tom McGinnis, the punter from Australia, they are joining the team as well. McGinnis has several years of eligibility. He will play behind Beeren Kernan this year, and Ryan Coe looks to compete with Noah Burnett for the starting place kicker role at North Carolina. Upgrades all around. We'll have to see.
Oh, Austria.
I did not say Austria. But let's get out of here
Well,
before it
then.
gets too wonky. Talking about punters and kickers, those guys are very important, but they are rare breeds. Appreciate it, Jason. Stay tuned to Inside Carolina for much more. The transfer portal opens again in May. Who knows what we'll be talking about at that point after spring practice. But as always, there is no off season, so stick to Jason Staples. Check out his video breakdowns on the Tar Pit Premium message boards, and I'll throw all of these together as a big, long podcast for those of you that don't like watching us on YouTube or can't watch us on YouTube, but want to listen us to your ears while you exercise. Jason, as always, my friend.